Now, Kenya's animated movie industry is in its infancy. Inspired by Hollywood, a few animators are determined, that is, despite limited resources, to produce world-class movies that not only entertain, but also address social, political, and political issues in Kenya and beyond. One such animator is Gatumia Gatumia. He's the CEO of RECON Digital, a Nairobi-based animation studio. I caught up with him on my recent trip to Kenya.
For as long as I can remember, I've enjoyed animation. And I know growing up, any opportunity to watch animation, I'd take it. And for a long time, since we didn't have a VCR at home, I looked forward to visiting our cousins who did have one, and we'd watch various Disney films there. And very glad when finally the local broadcaster started broadcasting animation in the afternoons, and I would relish that time watching a few shows. Throughout my life, I've enjoyed animation, especially work from great studios like Disney, Warner Brothers, etc., and some of the Japanese production houses. Perhaps I could say that I've loved animation all my life.
How did you start seeing the role you can play in different kind of issues in society?
Mm-hmm. Animation is a medium, like any other medium. So you can tell sad stories, happy stories, light stories, serious stories. Back in 2007, 2008, we had an election in Kenya, which was very contentious and which resulted in the loss of a lot of life. And I think I was deeply affected by it. We were living in Nakuru at the time, newlyweds with my wife, and she was working at the General Hospital in Nakuru. So many of the victims from the Rift Valley were passing through that hospital. I'd say through the early part of 2008, I was looking for a story to tell. And I remembered a story that I had read as a child about some animals who pretty much were fairly greedy and oppressed man who was trying to live peacefully with them in the forest. And I remember that story and found out that it is a story that was commonly told round about the independence period. And figured that I could adapt it into a short story to depict what was going on in Kenya at the time.
You've produced something extremely impressive, at least by my standards. And I think it is a world-class called Kura. Tell us about the Kura concept, where you came up with this, when and how you came up with this idea, and why you thought it's important to tell that story.
We as a nation, Kenya, we're about to go into a general election. In fact, it's just a few days away. And unfortunately, the lead up to this election has been very troubling. I think confidence has been shaken in the process. There were problems with the procurement processes. Questions were asked about that. We haven't done as well as we ought, perhaps, with rampant rigging being a constant feature in our elections, violence often accompanying general elections, political assassinations, and general corruption in the whole process. Last year, which would be 2016, I needed to do a project to test some new animation processes. And when thinking through what story I could tell, I stumbled upon a much larger action thriller type of story with an element of the electoral process.
You know, this country is a country that has a huge population of youth. You may be slowly getting out of the category of youth, but you're still a young person. What do you wish? What would you have loved to see, say, around this election? And what do you wish for the future of this country?
As a country, we should be able to choose leaders based on their strength of character and on their performance record. I really pray that we'll get to the place where we have almost professional managers leading our country. I also pray that we'd get beyond, the tribal and parochial mentalities that have perhaps held Kenya back in certain respects. And I'm hoping that more would be done to make sure that the resources which ought to be building this country don't end up wrongly in private pockets through corruption.
Gatumia Gatumia is speaking to me on the eve of Kenya's election on August 8th.